The rescue mission had stretched into its third day with no signs of the missing teen, and the team was beginning to feel the weight of failure pressing down on their shoulders. The forest was dense and unforgiving with gnarled roots threatening every step and fading daylight playing tricks on their tired eyes. They had searched ravines, riverbanks, and every deer trail that split through the woods, but nothing had turned up, not a scrap of clothing, not a footprint, not even the familiar scent. Trail. Their trained dogs were usually so quick to catch, but then something changed. The air felt tighter, and the birds that had been chirping in the distance suddenly went quiet, and that was when Baxter, the rescue dog, a 4-year-old German Shepherd, known for his sharp instincts, barked twice, short and urgent, the kind of bark that meant follow me now. Without hesitation his handler Sam gripped the lead tighter and gave the team a signal. Baxter bolted forward, yanking Sam with enough force to almost pull him off balance, and the rest of the crew quickly fell in line, moving fast. Despite their exhaustion, Baxter took them down a narrow animal path they had overlooked before, one that twisted between thick brush and dipped under fallen trees. The kind of path that no adult would notice, but a scared teenager might use to escape attention. Sam could feel the dog's muscles tighten with purpose, each movement more focused than the last, as if he knew exactly where he was going. The others followed in silence, boots crunching softly against the undergrowth, radios turned low, hearts pounding as the dog led them deeper into a part of the forest that felt older, untouched even by the usual hikers and hunters who frequented the area. The trees here grew taller, their branches tangled like twisted fingers, blocking out the sky above and casting strange shadows across the forest floor. About 20 minutes into the detour, Baxter stopped abruptly, his nose lifted and tail rigid. He stood motionless except for the twitch of his ears, and then without warning he let out a sharp bark and charged to the left toward a barely visible path swallowed by overgrowth. Sam shouted for the others to keep up, his voice rough with adrenaline, as they pushed past thorny bushes and slid down a muddy incline at the bottom of which they found themselves standing in a quiet clearing, one none of them had seen on the maps, a space that seemed too still, too hidden, and at the center of it sat an old wooden shed, partially collapsed and choked by ivy, the planks warped by time and moisture, its windows blackened from the inside. Baxter slowed his pace, now walking carefully toward the structure, nose low, ears alert, every muscle in his body coiled like a spring. The team formed a loose circle around the building, weapons drawn just in case, though none of them said it out loud. They all felt something here, something wrong, something that made the hairs on their necks stand up, and it was only the beginning. The moment Baxter turned sharply to the left and dashed through the wall of overgrowth, Sam knew this was not just another false lead. The brush was thick and thorny, but the dog tore through it with certainty, his head low and tail straight, like he was tracking something alive, something recent. The rest of the team scrambled after him, slipping on damp roots, ducking under low branches, each of them feeling the urgency that had suddenly taken hold. The narrow path they now followed had clearly not been walked in years. It was choked with weeds and covered in layers of dead leaves, but beneath the decay there was the faintest sign of passage, a broken twig here, a shifted patch of soil. Their tiny clues only a dog like Baxter could pick up on. The trail led them through an ancient part of the forest where the trees grew too close and the air felt like it had not moved in decades. Sam kept his grip firm on Baxter's lead, but the dog was nearly dragging him forward now, his muscles tense with focus, his breathing steady. He knew this scent was fresh, it meant someone had been here recently and that someone might still be close by. The team was quiet now, moving with disciplined silence, each step deliberate, each breath shallow. Their radios clicked softly in their pockets, muted for stealth. They were no longer just searching now, they were following something real, and that realization sent adrenaline pulsing through their tired limbs. The terrain shifted as they pressed deeper. The ground sloped downward, gradually leading them into a sunken part of the forest that the satellite maps had barely picked up on. Overhead the canopy thickened, turning the daylight into a murky green haze, and the only sounds were the crunch of boots and the occasional rustle of movement just ahead, always just out of sight. Baxter came to a sudden stop near a twisted old tree whose bark was stripped in patches, exposing pale wood beneath. He sniffed the base of the trunk, pawed at the soil, then turned his head sharply to the right, his body alert, his stance rigid. Sam followed his gaze and saw it at once. There, nestled between a curtain of hanging vines, was the outline of a narrow trail, almost invisible from a distance. The kind of trail a person might take if they were running from something or trying not to be found. It curved around a thick boulder, then dipped out of sight behind a ridge. Without a word, Sam and the others moved to follow it, boots crunching louder now, hearts beating faster. Baxter surged ahead, nose to the ground, as the trail began to widen slightly, and then just ahead they saw it. The trees opened into a clearing, a strange hollow at the bottom of the hill, surrounded by natural barriers. And far too quiet, and there it was, the shed, the same one that had been mentioned weeks ago by a local hunter who had once stumbled upon it and told the sheriff. It gave him chills. The team had dismissed it then, but now standing before it with Baxter growling low and steady, they knew they should have listened. This was not just a structure, it was a secret, and it was waiting to be discovered. The shed stood at the far edge of the clearing, hunched and sunken like it was trying to disappear into the earth, its roof sagging under the weight of years of decay, the wooden panels warped and splintered, some rotting away completely to reveal gaps that looked like dark open mouths. The team approached slowly, weapons lowered, but ready, their eyes scanning every shadow, every crack, every sign of movement. Baxter stopped just a few feet from the door, his nose twitching as he sniffed the ground, then the air, then the base of the doorframe. He let out a soft growl, not of fear, but of warning. Sam knelt beside him, trying to steady his own breath. He reached out and touched the door lightly. It moved with a reluctant creak, as if it had not been opened in a very long time. The silence in the clearing was deafening. No wind, no birds, no insects, not even the rustling of leaves. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The other team members formed a loose perimeter around the shed, their eyes flicking back and forth between the door and the trees behind them. All of them felt it now, a sense that something was wrong, not just unusual, not just eerie, but deeply wrong, the kind of feeling that sank into your bones and stayed there. Sam pushed the door open fully, revealing a darkness so thick it felt like a solid wall. The light from outside did little to penetrate it, and the air that drifted out was cold, damp, and heavy, with the smell of mold and old wood. The team activated their flashlights, beams cutting into the gloom and revealing the interior bit by bit. The floor was covered in debris, broken glass, old leaves, tools rusted beyond recognition, and scraps of paper that disintegrated at the slightest touch. Cobwebs draped across the ceiling like curtains, and in the corners shadows moved in ways that made the skin crawl. But it was what hung from the center beam that made everyone stop. A hoodie, red and faded, hanging from a single rusty nail, arms stretched wide like someone had placed it there on purpose. Beneath it, a pair of sneakers, white and clean, and placed side by side, as if the person who wore them had simply stepped out and left them behind. Sam stepped closer, his flashlight steady on the shoes. They matched the description from the parents of the missing teen exactly, even down to the small tear on the left heel. It was him, or at least it had been. Baxter whined and took a step back, his ears flat, his tail low. He looked up at Sam, then back at the doorway, as if urging them to leave, but no one moved, no one spoke. The weight of the scene held them in place. Something about the way the clothes were arranged so carefully, so deliberately, suggested this was not just where someone had been, it was where someone had been displayed. And that was when they noticed the writing on the wall. The moment they saw the writing on the wall, the mood shifted from uneasy to something far colder, something closer to dread. It was not painted or drawn, but scratched into the wood, deep and desperate lines dug over and over again, as if the person had kept carving long after the words were already visible. The messages were scattered across every surface, short phrases, sometimes repeated, sometimes nearly illegible, but all of them spoke of fear and isolation. Help me, still here, they are coming. Do not trust the quiet. These words were scratched at odd angles on every beam and board. Even the floor near the corner had messages clawed into the wood, some so frantic the marks looked more like torn gouges than handwriting. Sam ran his hand across one of the panels, feeling the rough grooves left behind by fingernails or maybe a sharp rock. He exchanged a glance with Miller, who had been in enough dark places to know this was not panic. This was someone being hunted, someone trying to warn whoever came next. One of the younger team members, Rodriguez, took a step back and leaned against the wall without realizing it, but the second his shoulder touched the wood, he jumped back like it had burned him. The whole place felt alive in the worst way, as if it had absorbed fear and was now radiating it back in waves. Baxter was pacing now, moving from one end of the shed to the other, pausing to sniff at the floor near the back where a broken crate had collapsed in on itself. Sam walked over, flashlight pointed downward, and crouched near the crate. His light caught something just beneath the debris, a faint outline of wood arranged in a square pattern, and when he brushed the dirt away, he found a handle, an old iron ring bolted to a trapdoor partially buried under dust and leaves. His stomach dropped. He reached for his radio and told the team to hold position, then slowly pried open the door. A stale gust of air hit them as the trapdoor creaked open, heavy with the scent of earth, mildew, and something harder to name, something older. The opening revealed a narrow shaft carved into the ground with wooden steps descending into darkness. It was not deep, maybe 6 or 7 feet, but the walls were dirt and stone, and the flashlight beam barely reached the bottom. Baxter stood at the edge, nose lifted, ears perked, and then they all heard it, a sound from below, not loud, but unmistakably human. It was the faintest voice, a whisper maybe, or a groan, hard to tell from the distance, but it was enough to make everyone freeze. Sam leaned closer and called down, "Can you hear me? We are here to help." But there was no answer, only a soft rustle, like fabric moving across dirt. He turned to the others and nodded. Miller went to the truck to grab the medical pack while Rodriguez prepared to descend, flashlight gripped tightly and breath caught in his chest. The boy they had searched for might be alive and only feet away, buried in silence beneath the shed that time had forgotten. Rodriguez took the first step into the narrow shaft, his flashlight beam slicing through the thick darkness and landing on a patch of earth that looked recently disturbed. He moved slowly, carefully testing each step before putting his full weight Down the wooden ladder groaned under him, but held steady as he descended into the tight space. The air grew colder with each foot he dropped, and the scent grew stronger, a mixture of mold, soil, and something else, something metallic and sour that clung to the back of his throat. Once at the bottom, he turned in a slow circle, taking in the small chamber, carved into the dirt, barely wide enough for two people to stand side by side, and just tall enough to crouch. The walls were covered in shallow scratch marks, like someone had been trying to dig their way out with bare hands. In the corner, just beyond the reach of the main beam, was a shape slumped against the wall, unmoving, but clearly human. Rodriguez called up softly, "I see someone, he's here," and immediately Sam began climbing down, while the others stayed above to cover them. Rodriguez moved closer, his flashlight illuminating the boy's face, pale, gaunt, eyes closed, but chest rising and falling with shallow breath. His clothes were torn and his arms covered in scratches, dried blood and dirt clinging to every inch of exposed skin. He looked like he hadn't eaten in days, maybe longer. His hands were still curled into fists, and his body flinched slightly as the light passed over his eyes. Even in his weakened state, he was trying to protect himself. Sam dropped beside Rodriguez and checked the boy's pulse, relief washing over him when he found it strong but slow. They unzipped the med kit and began to work quickly, wrapping a blanket around him, offering sips of water, checking for any immediate injuries. The boy mumbled something too faint to understand, and his eyes fluttered open for a moment, just long enough to see Sam's face, before closing again. Baxter was pacing above them, growling low and steady, like he could sense something wrong, still watching the trees and the shadows, like he was waiting for something or someone back in the hole. Sam found something clutched in the boy's hand, a folded piece of torn paper smudged with dirt and soaked from damp earth. He pried it loose gently and unfolded it, revealing uneven handwriting that read, "They watch me every night. They never came inside, but I knew they were there. They waited for the dark." He folded it back and slipped it into his pocket, not ready to read more. Not now, not yet. They needed to get the boy out first. Rodriguez helped lift the boy up to the others, who pulled him out with care, while Sam climbed out last, feeling every muscle in his back scream from tension. The second he was above ground again, the air felt lighter, but only slightly, and he looked at the shed one last time, knowing that what they had found here was only part of the story. Something had scared that boy enough to carve warnings into walls and sleep underground, and whatever that something was, it might still be nearby. The boy was barely conscious as they carried him out of the clearing, wrapped tightly in a thermal blanket and supported by Rodriguez and Miller, his legs limp, his breathing shallow, his face pale, but no longer ghost-like, as color slowly began to return. Sam walked beside them, not saying a word, his eyes scanning the trees as they moved back through the narrow trail that had brought them there. Baxter walked slightly ahead, ears up, tail stiff. Every few steps, he would stop, turn, and glance behind them, as if warning the team not to let their guard down. The feeling of unease had not lifted. In fact, it seemed to grow heavier with every step they took away from the shed. It was not until they reached the top of the ridge that Miller looked back and froze, his light still pointed at the clearing. The trees that lined the hollow were tall and bent slightly inward, giving the impression of a dome, and in the center, now barely visible in the mist, stood a figure, unmoving and too far to make out clearly, but tall and dark and silent. Sam raised his flashlight and aimed it at the same spot, but the figure was gone, vanished in the time it took him to blink. Rodriguez saw nothing, only shadows and fog and the empty shell of the rotting shed, but Miller swore he had seen someone there, and the chill in his voice made Sam believe him. They quickened their pace after that, moving through the woods in silence, the boy in their arms, muttering now and then fragments of sentences, pieces of memories that made little sense. They waited until dark. They came closer when I stopped hiding, eyes outside the walls. They watched me from the trees, no matter how quiet I was, no matter how deep I buried myself. His voice trembled with each word, and though the rescuers tried to comfort him, none of them could ignore the cold that seemed to cling to his skin, like it had come from within him, not just the cold of exposure, but something deeper, colder, older. By the time they reached the staging area, a medic team was waiting, and they quickly took over, strapping the boy to a stretcher and wheeling him into the mobile unit for immediate care. As they worked, Sam pulled the torn note from his pocket, the one the boy had clutched so tightly in the pit under the shed. He unfolded it again, and this time read the rest, the words scrawled in uneven letters, like the writer had been shaking or afraid, or both. "They will not let me leave. They are in the trees, and they do not sleep. I tried to be quiet. I tried not to breathe. I hear them when the wind dies." Sam folded the note and said nothing. He slipped it into a sealed bag and handed it to the sheriff, who had just arrived along with 2 deputies. The sheriff listened carefully as Sam and the others relayed what they had found and what they had heard, his expression growing darker with each sentence. When they finished, he looked back toward the woods and said one thing quietly: "We need to go back there." The team returned to the shed at first light with the sheriff, 2 deputies, and a new search dog named Luna, who was younger than Baxter but equally sharp. The forest was even quieter than before, and that silence pressed down on them like weight. With each step they took toward the clearing, the air grew thicker, colder, not with temperature, but with something else, something they could not explain, a pressure that made every breath feel shallow, every movement feel watched. Baxter was not with them this time. He had been left behind at the station, still restless and pacing, refusing to eat since the rescue, as if he sensed they were returning to something that should have been left alone. Luna hesitated as they approached the ridge, her nose twitching, her body stiff and tail low. She whined softly, but continued to follow the trail reluctantly, ears flicking back and forth as if picking up sounds too faint for the others to hear. The sheriff led the way, one hand resting on his sidearm, his eyes darting from tree to tree, his face set in the expression of a man who had seen too much, but still did not know what to expect. When they reached the clearing, the shed stood just as they had left it, but something was different. The door, which they had left open, was now closed tight, as if someone had pulled it shut from the inside. Rodriguez stepped forward and pulled it open, the hinges groaning louder than before, echoing through the woods in a way that made everyone flinch. The inside was darker, colder, despite the rising sun outside, and the first thing they noticed was that the red hoodie was gone, the shoes were gone, the scratches on the walls remained, but new ones had appeared, longer, deeper, and carved in a language none of them recognized, symbols, circles overlapping with jagged shapes, cutting through them like warnings or words. Sam moved slowly toward the trapdoor and opened it again. The smell that rose from it was sharper, this time more bitter. The pit below empty, but now the walls bore the same markings as the ones on the shed walls. The sheriff stepped back and looked around, his voice low when he spoke. This was not just a hiding place, someone made this into something else, something ritualistic. Something meant to trap or contain, not protect. He looked at Sam and said, "Get the journal, the boy's backpack, and the note. We need everything he touched or wrote, anything that might help us understand what happened here and who or what he was hiding from us." The team spread out to document the area. Luna began growling low in her throat, the hair on her back rising. She stared into the tree line where nothing moved, but her growl deepened, her muscles coiled and her eyes locked onto something none of them could see. The deputy nearest to her asked, "What is it, girl?" and Luna barked once loud, sharp, and then turned and bolted back down the path the way they came, running at full speed without looking back. The silence returned, heavier than before, and in the shadow of the trees something shifted again, unseen but deeply felt, and no one said a word. The team stood frozen for a long moment, watching the spot where Luna had disappeared down the trail. No one moved, no one spoke. The forest around them held its silence tighter than ever, as if the trees themselves were listening, breathing, waiting. The sheriff finally broke the stillness with a short command, "Pack it up, we are done here." His voice was flat, but beneath it was something else, fear maybe, or certainty. He turned and started back down the trail without waiting for a response, and the others followed one by one, each glancing back at the shed as they left. None of them wanted to turn their backs on it, but all of them wanted to leave as fast as possible. Back at the base camp they reviewed the boy's journal, the pages fragile and smeared with dirt, each entry a mix of fear, confusion, and obsession. At first the boy had written about getting lost, trying to find help, thinking he would be rescued soon, but by the third day something had changed. He stopped writing about food or water and started writing about the watchers. He never described them clearly, only that they were tall, thin, and moved between the trees without sound, and never blinked. He wrote that they only came when he was alone, and they only moved when he was not looking, and that their eyes glowed like frost in the moonlight. He tried to sleep during the day and stay hidden at night. He dug the pit under the shed with his hands. He scratched the warnings on the walls. He tried to make noise traps, anything to scare them off, but they kept coming closer each night until he stopped coming out of the hole entirely. The final entry was written in a jagged hand, barely readable, and soaked in what might have been rain or sweat or tears. It said, "If anyone finds this, I hope you are not too late. They are not part of this place, they are under it and around it, and they are older than the trees. They wait, and they feed on fear. They fed on mine, and I am so tired." The journal ended there, and after reading it no one asked any more questions. The boy survived, though it took weeks before he would speak again, and even then he never spoke about the shed or the forest or what he saw during those missing days. He only said one thing to Sam once, in a whisper so low it was barely audible. He said, "I think they let me go because they want someone to come back." The sheriff closed the case as an extreme survival incident, citing exposure, dehydration, and hallucinations brought on by isolation. But none of the team believed that. Not really. The shed was sealed off, the area around it restricted, but local hunters said they still hear strange sounds from that part of the forest sometimes, and the animals avoid it entirely. Baxter still refuses to go near the edge of the tree line, and some nights Sam dreams of red cloth swaying from a nail and eyes that never blink in the quiet and deep in the woods where the light does not reach. The door to the shed waits, patiently closed again, for the next one to open it.